My name is Liam, and I'm 28 years old. I'm telling you this because there are moments in life that reshape everything you thought you knew. Moments that burn themselves into your memory with such intensity you feel compelled to share them. For me, that moment arrived in a sterile, overpriced law office just after my father's funeral, as his will was about to be read. The air hung thick with the scent of old money and stale coffee, a peculiar mix that seemed to perfectly encapsulate my father's life and the complicated legacy he left behind. My stepmother, Eleanor, sat across from me, a smirk playing on her lips, barely contained beneath a veil of practiced sorrow. Her eyes, usually as sharp and calculating as a hawk's, gleamed with an almost indecent glee, darting between me and the polished mahogany table. She'd spent the last few weeks since Dad passed, dropping thinly veiled hints, making sure everyone around us understood her presumed inheritance. It was nauseating. "Your father and I had plans, Liam," she'd purred just the day before, her voice dripping with an artificial sympathy that grated on my nerves. Big plans for the future. He always said I was his rock, his true partner. I simply nodded, my gaze fixed on a faded spot on the carpet, trying to remain an unmoving stone in her path of self-congratulation. What was there to say? My father, Richard, had been a titan in the real estate world, a self-made man who built an empire from nothing, but he was also a whirlwind, unpredictable and often distant. His second marriage to Eleanor, a woman 15 years his junior, had always felt less like love and more like a carefully calculated business merger. I remember the way she'd casually mention the size of his portfolio during dinner parties, her laughter echoing a little too loudly in the grand foyer. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose glasses seemed perpetually steamed with the weight of legal documents, finally cleared his throat, pulling a thick envelope from a briefcase. The soft sound of paper sliding against paper was amplified in the hushed room. Eleanor straightened in her chair, a triumphant little tilt to her chin, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light. She looked ready to receive her coronation, convinced she was the undisputed queen of my father's substantial kingdom, even before a single word was read aloud. Her casual boastfulness was a constant low hum in the back of my mind, a grating reminder of her entitlement. As Mr. Henderson adjusted his spectacles, Eleanor leaned back, crossing her legs with an audible rustle of silk. She caught my eye and offered a saccharine smile, the kind that promised condescension wrapped in polite concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she mouthed, her voice a low, theatrical whisper that only amplified her smugness. I just stared back, a quiet knot of dread tightening in my stomach, utterly exhausted by the charade. I hadn't slept well in days, haunted by the final, strained conversations with my father, wishing I'd said more, wishing things had been different. Now, all I wanted was for this ordeal to be over, for the legal pronouncements to cease, and for the pretense to finally dissolve. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a dry, almost dusty sound. He slipped on a second pair of glasses and unfolded the document. The legal jargon began, a drone of clauses, assets, and liabilities. Eleanor sat poised, her smile widening with each mention of a property or portfolio, assuming each line confirmed her fortune. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor," Mr. Henderson intoned. Eleanor's head tilted back, a soft, self-satisfied sigh escaping her. My stomach twisted. I braced myself for the inevitable list of properties and sums that would cement her control over my father's legacy. She was already redecorating the estate in her mind. It felt like a twisting knife, a reminder of how little my father valued my presence in his financial world. The lawyer continued, detailing a substantial annuity for Eleanor, a comfortable sum, enough to maintain her lavish lifestyle. But it wasn't the sprawling estates or the majority shares in his companies. Her triumphant posture stiffened. Her eyes, darting towards me, narrowed, fixed on Mr. Henderson's impassive face. I felt a flicker of curiosity. This initial declaration, while generous, seemed limited for Eleanor. And to my son, Liam. Mr. Henderson paused, looking up, meeting mine. Eleanor shifted, a subtle tremor through her shoulders. The polite smile vanished, a thin, tight line replacing it. My breath caught. "A token sum?" a small trust fund to keep me comfortable but not in control. My father and I had always had a complex relationship, filled with unspoken expectations. To my son Liam, Mr. Henderson reiterated, his voice gaining emphasis, I bequeath the entirety of my real estate portfolio, including all commercial properties, residential holdings, undeveloped land. This includes controlling shares in Sterling Holdings, Inc., all associated financial accounts and liquid assets, totaling approximately $9 million. The words hung in the air, a seismic tremor. My mind reeled. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound echoing the profound silence. Eleanor shot to her feet, chairs scraping loudly against the polished floor, a sound that ripped through the stunned silence like torn silk. Her face, usually so composed, was contorted, blotchy with disbelief. "What did you say?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, completely abandoning her earlier pretense of decorum. $9 million? To him? That's impossible. Richard would never. He promised me everything. His entire life's work was for us. Her gaze, wild and accusing, darted from Mr. Henderson to me, as if we were co-conspirators in some grand deceit. Mr. Henderson, unperturbed, calmly adjusted his glasses, his demeanor a fortress of professional neutrality. "The will is clear, Mrs. Vance. Mr. Richard Vance explicitly bequeathed his entire real estate portfolio and associated assets to his son Liam. The document was prepared by my firm, witnessed and signed by your late husband." He tapped the thick paper, a crisp, final sound. I watched Eleanor, a strange mix of morbid fascination and pity stirring within me. Her carefully constructed world, built on assumptions and whispered promises, was crumbling right before her eyes. "Liar," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You manipulated him, didn't you? You always hated me. You turned him against me in his final days." Her voice rose, becoming shrill, echoing off the high ceilings. I remained seated, a quiet observer to her unraveling, feeling a peculiar detachment. Her accusations felt distant, like the frantic flailing of someone drowning. The truth was, my father and I hadn't even discussed his will. Our last conversations had been about his health, fragmented memories, and the complicated, unspoken weight of our past. "Eleanor, please, calm yourself," Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your inheritance is substantial, an annuity that will provide a very comfortable lifestyle for the remainder of your life." This was clearly outlined. He gestured to the specific paragraph concerning her annuity. She barely heard him, her eyes burning into me, consumed by a rage I'd only ever seen hinted at in her fleeting moments of irritation. Comfortable? I built this empire with him. Every dinner party, every social event, every sleepless night spent planning our future, she screamed, her words punctuated by choked sobs. He owed me this. He owed me everything. She looked genuinely devastated, a raw, ugly grief mixed with incandescent fury. For a moment, a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for her, seeing the shattered remnants of her ambition. Then I remembered her casual cruelty, the dismissive looks, the constant belittling. "Eleanor, that's enough," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, cutting through her hysteria. My father made his wishes clear. Mr. Henderson is simply reading what's written. I hadn't planned to speak, but her unfounded accusations had finally chipped away at my passive acceptance. A surge of protectiveness for my father's memory, however complicated it was, welled up. It felt like a defense of his final, surprising act of trust. She glared at me, her chest heaving. "You think this is over? You think you can just waltz in and take what's rightfully mine? I'll contest this. I'll fight you in every court. You won't see a dime of that money." Her threat hung heavy in the air, but her words lacked conviction, laced with desperation. It was the roar of a wounded animal, cornered and lashing out. My father, with his final act, had subtly reshaped the entire landscape of my life, a silent statement that reverberated far beyond the confines of that room. Mr. Henderson sighed, closing the will with a soft slap. "Mrs. Vance, I assure you the will is ironclad. It was recently updated, signed, and attested to. Any challenge would be arduous." His words were a professional warning, a quiet dismissal of her empty threats. Eleanor slumped back into her chair, defeated, but her eyes never left me. A silent promise of future conflict. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, legacy, and a father's final, unexpected message to his son. Eleanor remained slumped, a raw picture of shattered pride, her eyes fixed on me, promising retribution. The office, once thick with tension, now felt suffocatingly quiet. Mr. Henderson, ever composed, gathered his papers. "Liam, a copy of the will shall be couriered to your address by tomorrow," he stated calmly. "We'll need to schedule a follow-up to discuss asset transfer and management. It's substantial." I merely nodded, my throat tight. $9 million. Still echoed. A surreal, heavy cloak of responsibility settling on me. Eleanor finally pushed herself up, movements stiff, almost robotic. She adjusted her scarf, a futile attempt at composure, though her hands trembled. Without a word, she turned towards the door but paused, her back to me. "Richard had his moments of caprice," she said, voice strained, laced with cutting venom. "He always regretted impulsive decisions. You won't enjoy this, Liam. Not truly. He'll make sure of that, even from the grave." Her exit was abrupt, the door slamming, leaving a chilling void. A long, slow breath escaped me. Mr. Henderson offered a small, sympathetic smile. "She's a difficult woman. Your father was complicated. He made an amendment just 3 months ago, quite specific." His words implied a calculated choice, not a whim, deepening the enigma of my father's final act. This wasn't a gift. It was a carefully crafted puzzle. I pushed myself from the chair, my legs weak. The silence Eleanor left behind was uneasy, filled with echoes of her rage and the weight of my new reality. Stepping out, the city's bright sunlight felt jarring after the office's dim, charged atmosphere. The world seemed oblivious to the seismic shift in my life. A strange sensation as I carried this secret burden of immense wealth and burgeoning family animosity. My mind reeled, replaying the scene. Why had Dad done this? It wasn't just the money. It was the deliberate snub to Eleanor, the overwhelming trust placed in me. Our relationship had been distant, punctuated by strained calls. This felt like a posthumous challenge, a final test. Eleanor's chilling prophecy. "You won't enjoy this, Liam. Not truly," played on a loop. I knew she wouldn't let this go. Her pride, her perceived entitlement, and her desire for control would fuel a battle far more personal than any legal wrangling. The heavy weight of the future pressed down, inextricably linked to my father's past and Eleanor's unyielding bitterness. This new wealth felt less like freedom and more like a gilded cage. The city's pulse continued its indifferent rhythm around me, a symphony of honking cabs and distant sirens, completely unaware of the quiet explosion that had just reshaped my world. I walked, not really seeing the familiar storefronts or the hurried faces, but feeling an immense, almost physical pressure behind my eyes. $9 million. The sum itself felt abstract, a string of digits devoid of immediate meaning, yet it anchored a terrifying new reality. It wasn't just money. It was a testament, a final, undeniable statement from a man who had rarely been direct with his emotions. Eleanor's words, sharp as shards of glass, still reverberated in my mind. "You won't enjoy this, Liam. Not truly. He'll make sure of that, even from the grave." Her parting shot, delivered with such venom, had been intended to wound, to plant a seed of doubt, and in that moment, as the afternoon sun beat down, I wondered if she wasn't entirely wrong. The elation one might expect from such an inheritance was absent, replaced by a hollow ache, a profound sense of isolation. This vast fortune felt less like a gift and more like a heavy crown, pressing down on a head utterly unprepared to wear it. My father, Richard. The name itself brought a familiar pang of complicated feelings. He was a man of grand gestures in business, but small, almost non-existent ones in personal connection. Our relationship had always been a series of polite exchanges, carefully guarded silences, and unspoken expectations. I remembered a particular summer years ago when he'd taken me to one of his construction sites. He'd shown me blueprints, his eyes alight with passion, explaining the intricate framework, the vision. I'd nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm, but all I truly felt was the vast distance between his world and mine. He'd tried, in his own way, I supposed. A generous allowance through college, occasional invitations to corporate dinners where I felt like a prop, but never a deep, probing conversation about life, or fears, or even simple joys. It was as if he was afraid of genuine intimacy, choosing instead to express his care through material provision. Now, this colossal inheritance felt like his ultimate, most desperate attempt to connect, or perhaps to control even from beyond. It was a posthumous burden, layered with a question I couldn't answer. The unexpected nature of his decision, bypassing Eleanor completely for the core of his empire, spoke volumes. It wasn't just a simple distribution of assets. It was a final, damning judgment on his second marriage, a silent disavowal of Eleanor's self-proclaimed partnership. This wasn't merely about wealth, but about legacy and the true heir to his ambition. My father, in his final act, had managed to be both incredibly generous and incredibly cruel, ensuring Eleanor's humiliation was public, cementing my place as the true successor, whether I wanted it or not. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The city's pulse continued its indifferent rhythm around me, a symphony of honking cabs and distant sirens, completely unaware of the quiet explosion that had just reshaped my world. I walked, not really seeing the familiar storefronts or the hurried faces, but feeling an immense, almost physical pressure behind my eyes. $9 million. The sum itself felt abstract, a string of digits devoid of immediate meaning, yet it anchored a terrifying new reality. It wasn't just money, it was a testament, a final, undeniable statement from a man who had rarely been direct with his emotions. Eleanor's words, sharp as shards of glass, still reverberated in my mind. "You won't enjoy this, Liam. Not truly. He'll make sure of that, even from the grave." Her parting shot, delivered with such venom, had been intended to wound, to plant a seed of doubt. And in that moment, as the afternoon sun beat down, I wondered if she wasn't entirely wrong. The elation one might expect from such an inheritance was absent, replaced by a hollow ache, a profound sense of isolation. This vast fortune felt less like a gift and more like a heavy crown, pressing down on a head utterly unprepared to wear it. My father, Richard. The name itself brought a familiar pang of complicated feelings. He was a man of grand gestures in business, but small, almost non-existent ones in personal connection. Our relationship had always been a series of polite exchanges, carefully guarded silences, and unspoken expectations. I remembered a particular summer, years ago, when he'd taken me to one of his construction sites. He'd shown me blueprints, his eyes alight with passion, explaining the intricate framework, the vision. I'd nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm, but all I truly felt was the vast distance between his world and mine. He'd tried in his own way, I supposed. A generous allowance through college, occasional invitations to corporate dinners where I felt like a prop, but never a deep, probing conversation about life, or fears, or even simple joys. It was as if he was afraid of genuine intimacy, choosing instead to express his care through material provision. Now, this colossal inheritance felt like his ultimate, most desperate attempt to connect, or perhaps to control even from beyond. It was a posthumous burden, layered with a question I couldn't answer. The unexpected nature of his decision, bypassing Eleanor completely for the core of his empire, spoke volumes. It wasn't just a simple distribution of assets, it was a final, damning judgment on his second marriage, a silent disavowal of Eleanor's self-proclaimed partnership. This wasn't merely about wealth, but about legacy and the true heir to his ambition. My father, in his final act, had managed to be both incredibly generous and incredibly cruel, ensuring Eleanor's humiliation was public, cementing my place as the true successor, whether I wanted it or not. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. Arriving back at my modest apartment, the familiar quiet felt unusually heavy, almost suffocating. The day's events replayed in my mind with brutal clarity, Eleanor's contorted face vivid against the backs of my eyelids. I tossed my keys onto the small table by the door, the jingle echoing too loudly in the sudden stillness. For the first time, the comfort of my solitude felt like a strange, unsettling isolation. There was no one to truly share this with, no one who could comprehend the bizarre cocktail of shock, fear, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of vindication that coursed through me. My hand instinctively went to my phone, a sudden urge to call someone, anyone, to make this real, or to make it disappear. A few days later, the initial surreal haze began to dissipate, replaced by a dizzying torrent of reality. My email inbox became a battleground of subject lines. Urgent, estate of Richard Vance. Sterling Holdings, immediate succession. Legal consultation required. Each message felt like a new weight settling onto my shoulders. Mr. Henderson's assistant had scheduled a follow-up meeting, a preliminary discussion about asset transfer and the sheer scope of the inheritance. It was then, amidst the growing pile of paperwork, that the first subtle tremor of Eleanor's promised fight truly manifested. One afternoon my phone rang, an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. A cold, clipped voice introduced herself as Ms. Davies, representing Mrs. Eleanor Vance. My heart gave a sharp, involuntary lurch. Mr. Vance, she began, her tone devoid of warmth. We believe there may have been undue influence regarding the latest amendment to your father's will. My client is prepared to explore all legal avenues to ensure her rightful claim is acknowledged. The words were formal, precise, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Undue influence? I repeated, my voice betraying a slight tremor, despite my best efforts to keep it steady. My father made his decisions. They were clear, and Mr. Henderson confirmed the will's validity. I could almost hear Eleanor's satisfied smirk through her lawyer's rigid professionalism. This was her, poking and prodding, testing the boundaries, exactly as she'd vowed she would. The image of her trembling finger pointing at me flashed in my mind. My client asserts that Mr. Vance, in his declining health, was susceptible to persuasion, Ms. Davies continued, unperturbed by my rebuttal. We have witnesses to his state of mind during that period. This is merely an informal notice, Mr. Vance, to inform you of Mrs. Vance's intent to contest. She didn't wait for a reply, simply stating, "Good day," and disconnected. The line went dead, leaving an echoing silence in my apartment, now suddenly feeling smaller, colder. This wasn't just an abstract threat anymore. It was a carefully calculated move on a chessboard I was only just learning to play. The call left a bitter taste in my mouth, a stark reminder that this vast inheritance wasn't a windfall, but a gauntlet thrown. My father's final act, meant perhaps as a legacy, had instead ignited a war. I looked around my small living room, at the worn armchair, the stacks of books, the quiet simplicity of my life. It felt like a precious, fragile thing, now threatened by the looming shadow of $9 million and the insatiable ambition of Eleanor. Her prophecy, "You won't enjoy this, Liam," not truly, began to feel less like a spiteful wish and more like a cruel, self-fulfilling curse. The venom of Ms. Davies' voice lingered, a faint hum in the quiet of my apartment, transforming the silence into something menacing. Eleanor's prediction, delivered with such bitter certainty, felt like a noose tightening around my burgeoning fortune. The initial shock of the inheritance had given way to a chilling sense of dread. This wasn't merely a legal skirmish, it was a personal vendetta, fueled by my stepmother's wounded pride and boundless avarice. I slumped onto my worn sofa, the cheap fabric a stark contrast to the millions now nominally mine, and pressed my palms against my temples, trying to quell the throbbing headache that had become a constant companion since Dad's funeral. My father, even in death, had a knack for throwing my world into chaos. That very evening, I called Mr. Henderson. His voice, calm and professional as ever, was a welcome anchor in the storm of my anxieties. "Mr. Vance," he began, "I anticipated this. Mrs. Vance has a history of strong opinions, particularly where your father's assets are concerned. Her lawyer has already been in touch with my office." His words were a grim confirmation of my fears. "What does undue influence even mean?" I asked, the legal term feeling like an abstract weapon pointed directly at me. "It's a common tactic in contested wills, Liam," Mr. Henderson explained patiently. "They will try to argue that your father was not of sound mind, or that you somehow manipulated him into changing his will in your favor. It's a baseless claim, given the witnesses and the recent update of the document, but it will prolong the process and incur significant legal fees." He paused, and I heard the rustle of papers on his end. "My recommendation is simple. We fight it. We have a robust case. Do not engage with Mrs. Vance or her counsel directly." The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of legal correspondence and a pervasive sense of unease. Letters arrived, thick with legalese, each one a fresh assault on my peace of mind. Eleanor's legal team filed motions, requested documents, and even attempted to schedule depositions, all designed to chip away at my resolve and drain my nascent inheritance in legal costs. It felt like I was being slowly suffocated by paperwork, the weight of the $9 million transforming into a leaden cloak, heavy and suffocating. My small apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground, the walls closing in. I found myself increasingly withdrawn, canceling plans with friends, unable to shake the gnawing anxiety. The prospect of managing a vast real estate empire felt like a cruel joke, given I could barely manage my own modest expenses. How could I navigate boardrooms and negotiate deals when my mind was consumed by the bitter machinations of my stepmother? I often stared at my reflection, seeing not the Liam I knew, but a hollowed-out version, marked by sleepless nights and the invisible scars of this inheritance war. Eleanor's curse, her spiteful whisper, seemed to manifest in every worried thought. Then came the more insidious attacks, subtle at first, then increasingly overt. A snide comment from an acquaintance at the gym about my sudden good fortune, implying I'd somehow taken advantage of my father. A veiled article in a local society column mentioning unforeseen complications in the Vance estate, hinting at family discord. I knew Eleanor was behind it, her influence seeping into every corner of my life, trying to discredit me, to paint me as a mercenary son who had swindled his ailing father. She wasn't just after the money. She was after my reputation, my peace, everything. My resolve hardened, slowly but surely. I recalled a conversation with my father years ago where he'd said, "In business, Liam, you never show weakness. Never let them see you bleed." The words, once abstract advice, now resonated with a chilling clarity. This wasn't just about the will anymore. It was about protecting my father's final, unexpected statement, his legacy. It was about standing my ground against a woman who had always tried to diminish me, even before his death. The passive observer within me began to recede, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning determination to fight for what was rightfully mine, not just the money, but the truth of my father's complex love. "We need to respond firmly to every single one of their filings, Mr. Henderson," I told him during our next call, my voice steadier than before. "Don't let them drag this out unnecessarily. Let's push back." A new kind of energy coursed through me, not one of excitement, but of grim purpose. The fear had not vanished, but it was now tempered by a growing anger, a refusal to be a victim in a narrative Eleanor was so eager to write. This battle for my inheritance was becoming a battle for my dignity, and I wasn't about to yield. The constant pressure of the impending legal battle began to warp my perception of time, each day a slow, grinding mechanism of anticipation and dread. The city outside my window, once a vibrant tapestry of sounds and movement, now seemed to mock my internal turmoil with its indifferent rhythm. My small, ordinary life was irrevocably entangled with the grand, messy legacy of my father, a man I had never truly understood, yet whose final act had now inextricably linked our destinies in a web of public scrutiny and family animosity. The legal battle intensified, a relentless siege on my already fragile peace. My initial anger had solidified into a grim resolve, fueled by Mr. Henderson's calm, strategic guidance. "They've requested a deposition, Liam," he informed me one morning, his voice unwavering. "Eleanor herself, and she's bringing up your father's medical records." It's a desperate move. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about tearing apart my father's final wishes, desecrating his memory. Let them, I replied, the words surprising even myself with their newfound strength. Let her try to paint him as senile. We know the truth. He was sharp as ever when he made that amendment. Mr. Henderson nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Precisely. We have the witnesses, the documentation. Her argument is weak, but she's leveraging public opinion. The media's been sniffing around, thanks to her leaks. The thought of our private family drama becoming tabloid fodder filled me with a fresh wave of disgust. The day of Eleanor's deposition arrived, overcast and somber, mirroring the mood in the sterile conference room. She sat opposite me, Ms. Davies by her side, her face a mask of wounded dignity, but her eyes held a spark of defiant anger. Mr. Henderson began his questioning, methodical and precise, chipping away at her narrative. Mrs. Vance, you claim undue influence. Yet you yourself attested to Mr. Vance's mental acuity in countless public appearances just weeks before his passing, correct? Eleanor stiffened, her carefully constructed composure cracking. Richard was complicated, she stammered, avoiding my gaze. He had his moments of clarity, yes, but also periods of confusion, especially after his treatments. Ms. Davies interjected, objection, badgering the witness. But Mr. Henderson pressed on, unfazed. So, when you publicly praised his sharp business acumen, were you misrepresenting the truth, Mrs. Vance? Her eyes flashed, a cornered animal's desperate fury. No, I was protecting him, protecting his reputation, she shrieked, her voice echoing the rage from the will reading. He was easily swayed. Liam manipulated him. He always wanted everything Richard had, and he twisted my husband's mind against me. Her carefully chosen words dissolved into a familiar, baseless accusation. The emotional climax was here, raw and ugly. Mrs. Vance, we have signed affidavits from 3 independent doctors confirming Mr. Vance's full cognitive capacity right up to his passing, including the period the amendment was made, Mr. Henderson stated calmly, laying out documents. We also have an email from your personal assistant, dated just 2 weeks before the amendment, detailing your plans for significant renovations to the properties you expected to inherit. Does this not suggest a clear understanding of your husband's intentions and your own expectations? A profound silence descended, heavier than any I had experienced since my father's passing. Eleanor's face went pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Her assistant's email was a damning piece of evidence, betraying her prior confidence in the very will she was now contesting. It stripped away her pretense of being an unsuspecting victim and revealed her as a calculating opportunist. Ms. Davies, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled. Eleanor slowly slumped back into her chair, the fight drained from her, leaving behind only the cold, hard reality of her defeat. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked utterly diminished, a woman stripped bare of her illusions. Her perfect facade had shattered into 1,000 pieces right before my eyes. This wasn't the triumphant victory I might have imagined. It was just quiet. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not with anger or resentment, but with a strange, hollow empathy. Her ambition, her perceived entitlement, had led her to this moment, raw and exposed. And as I watched the last vestiges of her pride crumble, I realized something profound. The $9 million, the vast empire my father had left, felt like a silent, empty space between us. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a deep, pervasive weariness. The battle had been won, but the cost felt immense. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. Eleanor sat, unmoving, her gaze fixed on nothing, a striking image of a broken dream. The sound of Mr. Henderson gathering his papers was unusually loud in the quiet room. This wasn't the thrilling crescendo of a movie, but the stark, quiet aftermath of a war fought not with bullets, but with words and bitter accusations. And in that silence, I heard my father's voice, a whisper from the grave, not of triumph, but of finality. After Eleanor and Ms. Davies finally departed, leaving behind the chilling scent of their desperation, Mr. Henderson and I sat for a few more minutes in the profound quiet. The tension had vanished, but in its place, a different kind of silence settled, one filled with the echoes of shattered expectations and an unexpected melancholy. My gaze drifted to the now empty chair where Eleanor had been, and it felt like looking at a vacant stage after a particularly intense, draining play. The drama was over, the curtain fallen, but the emotions lingered, a strange residue in the air. This wasn't the triumphant feeling I had anticipated, the elation of prevailing. It was something far more somber, a quiet acknowledgement of the true cost of battles won. Mr. Henderson, with a gentle sigh, broke the stillness. "Liam," he began, his voice softer now, devoid of legal formality. "I believe your father wanted you to truly understand the weight of his world. Not just the assets, but the responsibility. He always valued your quiet strength, even if he didn't always show it." His words hung in the air, a small comfort, yet also a new burden. I found myself nodding, the truth of his statement echoing deeply within me. My father, Richard, had been a man of immense power, but also immense solitude, and perhaps a profound misunderstanding of how to express affection beyond material provision. The lawyer rose, gathering his remaining papers with a quiet precision. "The transfer process will begin immediately. We'll schedule your first meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board next week. There's much to learn, but you won't be alone." He offered a small, reassuring smile, a rare glimpse of warmth from the usually stoic man. I mumbled my thanks, my mind already drifting, trying to grasp the enormity of what lay ahead. This wasn't merely about inheriting money. It was about inheriting an identity, a legacy, and a world I knew little about. Leaving the law office, the city outside felt different this time. The afternoon light seemed softer, the sounds of traffic more distant, as if I had stepped into a quieter, more reflective space. The heavy weight of the legal battle had lifted, replaced by a strange lightness mixed with a profound sense of purpose. Eleanor's face, contorted in defeat, no longer fueled my anger, but a peculiar sadness. Her desperate grasping for wealth had ultimately stripped her of everything, even her dignity. It was a stark, almost cautionary tale. I walked without a destination, the warmth of the sun on my face a stark contrast to the chilled air of the conference room. My father's final act, this bewildering bequest, was no longer just about the money. It was his last, convoluted attempt to communicate, to pass on not just his empire, but perhaps a fragment of himself. A whisper of regret, a silent plea for understanding, a challenge to forge my own path within the framework he had meticulously constructed. The $9 million, the vast real estate portfolio, no longer felt like a crown pressing down, but a landscape unfolding before me. A landscape not just of buildings and balance sheets, but of responsibilities, of opportunities, and a chance to rewrite the narrative of my own life, untangled from the shadows of my father's complicated legacy and Eleanor's bitter resentment. The path ahead was unknown, daunting, but for the first time it felt truly mine to define. I thought of my father, not as the distant, powerful figure, but as a man who, in his final moments, had made a choice that defied expectation, a choice that revealed a hidden layer of intent. Perhaps he had seen something in me, a quiet resilience, that even I hadn't recognized. This inheritance wasn't just a sum, it was a testament, a final, unwritten letter from a complex man to his son. The city hummed around me, its ceaseless energy a backdrop to my newfound quietude. The battle was over, the noise had faded, leaving only the profound silence of new beginnings. And in that stillness, I understood that true legacy wasn't just about what you left behind, but what you chose to carry forward, what you chose to build. It was a soft whisper of universal truth, echoing through the empty spaces my father had left, and the unexpected fullness they now held.